There are several excellent, outstanding wrestling families like the Harts, the Wild Samoans, the Fullers, the Guerreros, the Armstrongs, and one family in particular had a unique and sometimes scary collection of talent. The Vachons, Mad Dog, Luna, Vivian, not so scary, and The Butcher, scary. Yikes! Paul Vachon, via the phone lines from South Florida to Quebec. He and his lovely wife, Dee, getting through the pandemic from home and starting a Paul the Butcher Vachon fan Facebook page. Very cool, very cool. It's the Butcher. Stomp, stomp. Thank you, Butcher. So, Paul, I got to start with this. Are you a pro hockey fan?
All French Canadians or all Canadians are hockey fans.
Yes. Were you a fan of the then past Quebec Nordiques?
Well, actually, the first team I was a fan of was the Montreal Canadiens, of course. And the first professional game I ever saw was at the Montreal Forum. And later on, when I got to be promoter, and we played all the wrestlers played the old timers from the Montreal Canadian and the Forum, and the house was packed. And believe it or not, I was the manager, so all kinds of souvenirs about hockey, of course, being Canadian and anyway North American. Actually, everybody loves hockey.
So, Paul,
first of all, let me tell you something else. The sport of the French Canadian, the national sport was hockey, and the national sport of the hockey players was wrestling.
Yes.
Believe this or not.
Yes, I do believe it. I do believe it. So many pro athletes love pro wrestling, and that's so cool to hear. So, hey, was Guy Lafleur a big wrestling fan?
Well, actually, Guy Lafleur was a wrestling fan before he became a hockey player, because he was from Quebec City. And we used to go there and wrestle, when I first started. We used to do Quebec City, Montreal, Three Rivers, and all the cities in French Canada. And I didn't know him then, but I knew him after, and he's the one that told me that,
Did any of the hockey players ever approach you about wanting to be a pro wrestler?
No, but I had many, well, not many, maybe 3 or 4 of the wrestlers, the hockey players that after they retired, they came to referee for us, special referees like Boom Boom Geoffrion, and there was other ones too. I forget who the hell they were, but the toughest guy on the team was Geoffrion anyway. They didn't call him Boom Boom for nothing.
Those guys are very tough. Boom Boom could have made a good wrestler, do you think?
Yeah, well, that's what he often told us. He said if I hadn't been a hockey player, he said I would have been a wrestler. But he was a referee, and believe it or not,
that is so good. That is so good.
What makes me laugh is he was a villain referee. He used to take the sides of the villains. And then we'd get in trouble, have to fight out of the ring and everything, and Geoffrion would be all with us and everything. He was a hell of a guy. I loved him.
That is so cool. He was a villain referee. Boom, boom. It fit him. And that fit his hockey personality. That fit. But that is so cool that you went to the Montreal Forum to see hockey, and then you had a lot of the hockey players also coming out to see the wrestling. Did you wrestle at the Forum then too? You had shows at the Forum as well?
Yes, no, that's another story. And you're probably hearing that only from me. Now, after, I'd been wrestling for years, we were wrestling in Calgary, and somebody came and they said, look, we want to promote wrestling in Montreal, and we want you and Mad Dog to come and wrestle for us and be part of the company. You get it? So, and Mad Dog said, well, I don't know. I'm the one that told Mad Dog, I said, gee, I don't know, Mad Dog. I said, we're making lots of money here. Why stop here, and go to Montreal not knowing how it's going to go and everything, because we knew we could make it in Montreal. Anyway, to shorten my story, make a long story short, when we got to Montreal, we got into some problems because the promoter that we had, he was no good. He didn't know how to do it, and we were going down the tubes as opposition to the Johnny Rougeaus outfit that was already promoting in Montreal. So they said the only way, Mad Dog said the only way we're going to get this is to get the Forum. And he says the only way we're going to get the Forum, he says, is to have one of us hold the license. But the problem was, when you held the license in Montreal, you could not be wrestled on the card. You understand?
Yes.
It would have been how do you say, against the interest of the wrestler to be the promoter and all that. So I said, okay, well, I won't wrestle in Montreal, and I'll make an application at the commission to get the license. And right away they gave me the license, and then that's how come I never wrestled much in Montreal.
That's amazing.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, that's amazing, and it's something. I'm surprised you guys didn't do an angle though, like you were banned, like something that you were banned from wrestling, because behind the scenes you couldn't. But that there was an angle set up, or no angle was set up saying you were I'm gonna wrestle, and then they were like, no, you can't wrestle. You're not wrestling. You're banned. Paul the Butcher Vachon is banned. We don't want the Butcher.
Listen, it sounds like a very good angle, but you're 50 years late.
Yeah, you're right. I'm 50 years late. Oh, that's a great story. Oh my gosh. Hey, now you said there were many pro hockey players that wanted to be pro wrestlers. How about this? Did Paul the Butcher Vachon ever want to be a pro hockey player?
Well, no. No, I'll tell you why. And that's another part of this story. I was born in Montreal, and I lived there until 1947. And I never had any skates. And, so I never learned to skate until later, until I was of wrestling age anyway, so that's the story. Believe it or not, when there's 13 kids in your family, you don't have skates for everybody. And in the first pair of skates I had been Mad Dog's when he was 14, 15, and skating around, and then when he grew out of those shoes, I got into them, and that's when I learned to skate. So I was late, but I was not late learning how to wrestle, I tell you.
You made a good career choice, right? It worked out well for you.
It worked out wonderful, and listen, I'll say this before I forget to say it. I wrestled all over the world. It was my life. I had children born in 3 different countries all over the place. And if some miracle happened and that my body could do it again, I would do it again in a minute for free. And I enjoyed every minute of it, and I still enjoy it.
And a lot of fans enjoyed what you did as well. It's just awesome. I want to ask about those skates, though, because you mentioned you had 13 kids in the family, and they were Mad Dog skates. I'm wondering, when you got the skates, were they all chewed up and mangled because Mad Dog had them?
Well, actually, they were pretty good. My father, you know, and when you got 13 kids, you learn to do everything. You fix your shoes, you know, give your haircuts, you do everything for us that you couldn't afford when you got 13 kids.
Yeah,
you
but
can't take them all to the barber.
No, I know, but right. But Paul, they were Mad Dog skates. So I'm figuring Mad Dog got his practice from the early days and start chewing on them like a Mad Dog.
And not only that, his feet were shorter than mine.
Oh no.
Yeah. So for a while, you know, when I first started wearing them, they'd fit. But let me tell you something about Mad Dog. He always lied about his height. he always, listen to this. All his brothers were taller than him. A couple of my sisters were taller than him. And he was, actually, he always said his height was 5'8". I don't know why the hell he lied about half an inch. His real height was 5'7.5". But for some reason, it made him feel better to say he was 5'8". And whenever I reminded him, he'd say, shut up.
That's great. Oh my God, that's so good. Oh, it's so cool. It's so interesting. And I'll say The Butcher. Now, there was another interesting thing that I read. Well, I'm going to go to this because you mentioned the Montreal Forum, and you mentioned that you could not wrestle there. You could do one or the other. You could be a promoter or wrestle. That's the way it was. You later in life, you went on to try a political career. And I'm wondering, was that one of the reasons you ended up trying a political career? Not just that, but just like some of these laws that were in place, like even something like that? Or no, that didn't have anything to do with it?
No, you know, listen, I quit wrestling. I was 49 years old, 50 years old. And that's, in all respects to all the wrestlers that came before me, that's too old to be a wrestler, you know. But I had to be into something that had to do with the public, and I figured that the name was already there. And then I got friendly with the then chief of the New Democrats, and he says, listen, you're so popular, you know, the New Democrats started out west, and they were coming this way. And he said, you're popular at the forum, and he said, why don't you come and join the New Democratic Party? And I did. And I ran 2-3 times, but it was like a wrestling campaign, you know. I talked a lot about wrestling, and everywhere I went, people knew me, and I enjoyed it. But the party I had joined, because they had asked me, they were not popular on back east there, you know. They were the party from out west. But I'm sure you didn't call me to talk about politics.
I know, I did. No, but I thought that was interesting. A little interesting side note for you that you experienced.
Well, it was.
Yeah, experienced some politics. But you're right. I didn't call just to say that. I did want to ask one other thing outside of wrestling because I thought this was interesting too. Your father was a Montreal police officer, correct?
Yes.
I'm wondering, Paul, did you or Mad Dog or any of the other 13 children go into the police force or any type of law enforcement or anything like that? Or no, he didn't have any thoughts of doing that?
I never did, but I have a brother that, now listen to this, I'll start from the end. There's a building in Montreal that houses the Provincial Police Union, and that's called the Arthur Vachon Building, because my brother Arthur, which was about a year younger than I, he did some amateur wrestling, but he never was a pro, and he became a policeman and in the provincial police, and he found out that the provincial police at that time was rotten with people that had been hired because they paid to get in. You get it?
Yes.
So he decided, well, that's not right. You know, his father had been in the police force. He had raised 13 kids, and he had a lot of respect for the police. But he saw that it was all a big racket. Only the guys that could pay the money. So he formed the union. And they got rid of all that. And they fired him. But the police union was started by him. And now they have the most honest police force in the world, in the province of Quebec.
That is yeah, that's an awesome story and tribute to, that's your brother Arthur, correct?
Yes.
That's a great tribute to him and what he was doing. Okay, Paul, thank you for putting up with all the hockey talk and other things. Now we'll get to some wrestling talk.
Yeah, no problem.
I've got to ask this. Did you ever see the wrestling character? Because with the family, with the dad in the police force and Arthur, of course, did you ever see the Mountie, Jacques Rougeaus, playing the Mountie in WWF? Did you ever see that wrestling character on TV, or you never got to see that?
Never.
Oh my gosh, he did.
I never did. Just lately I've heard of it.
Jacques Rougeaus was the Canadian Mountie. He was the heel. Oh, it was a great character. Did you ever work with or have any of the Rougeaus on any of your shows?
Not on my shows. But I wrestled all of them except for Jacques' boys.
And then what?
I wrestled all the Rougeaus. You know, I mean, there was Jacques Rougeau and Johnny Rougeau, and their uncle Lenny Ogie, and all that. They came from a wrestling family too.
Yeah, see, I didn't know that. I knew there was the Rougeau brothers, which were the youngest ones, which were Rene and Jacques. So they were wrestling, but they also had family members that wrestled. And you wrestled them. That's great. How about the Goulet brothers, Rene Goulet and Jacques Goulet?
Well, I never knew Jacques Goulet, but Rene Goulet started wrestling for us in Grand Prix wrestling.
What do you remember about Rene? He had an interesting type of style.
Yeah, well, he had a very original style from Quebec City, and he was a gentleman. He was one hell of a guy. I've lost track of all those guys at first. A lot of them are gone now. I'm one of the few veterans of my age, because wrestling is not conducive to a long life, and I guess that's why. But I had plenty of memories to write 3.5 books about it, though.
That's amazing, and it's so cool because you have listed on your, and I'm reading it now because Paul the Butcher Vachon has a Facebook page for the fans. It's at Paul the Butcher Vachon, and he's 82 years strong, Paul. Amazing. And you're having a big summer sale on the page, which includes your book signed and personalized for $49.95. That includes shipping, or plus shipping, plus shipping. You can message through the Facebook page Very cool. And it really is cool because the books, when wrestling was real, you had so much information that you made it into 3 books. And then there's also Wrestling with the Past, with you and your wife Dee wrote. And they're available on the Facebook page. And from those books, you also were able to make a documentary about all the wrestling Vachons and other family members of the Vachons as well. Now, the movie is The Last Villain, and it is done in French, and it's available in Canada. Now they're trying to get it done in English and available in the U.S. That's the next step for the movie. But it's a documentary about all the Vachons. It's really cool. What a history. Mad Dog, Luna, Vivian, and then obviously the man himself, The Butcher. Paul, how did you get the name The Butcher? Were you a butcher? Were you a butcher beforehand? Did you cut up the meat? Were you working at the butcher shop? What's going on?
Listen, but I want to add another minute before I come back to that about the movie. It's done mostly in French, but some of the characters in there can't speak French, so they speak English, and also it has English subtitles.
Oh, that's very good. So even if you get the movie, you'll be able to go through it because it'll have English subtitles. So that's very good. And it's called The Last Villain. So that's good because you are the last remaining wrestling member of the Vachon family. So it's why it's called The Last Villain. Am I correct?
Yes.
That is awesome.
As a matter of fact, right now, I'm the oldest surviving member of the family. There's only 4 of us left out of 13.
And then, Paul, how did you get the name The Butcher? Hey, Paul, do you have a favorite steak? Are you a ribeye guy? Are you a steak guy? Are you sirloin? I don't think you're filet mignon. What kind of steak guy are you, Butcher?
Well, actually, I loved all the steaks in the world, but not recently, but if I wanted to stay alive and save my life, I became a vegetarian about 20 years ago.
Wait a minute, then it has to be Paul, the spinach Vachon doesn't fit. No. Okay, Paul, I'll put aside the silliness. How did you get the name The Butcher?
Well, Maurice, from the beginning, from the time he was 14 and started doing road work, he used to bring me along with him. And by that time, I was like 5, 6 years old. And he used to do road work, so he used to take me along with him. And when you're 6 years old, you can run all day. But Mad Dog used to run 20 miles at a time, So after a while, I'd be running with him, but after a while, a kid like that, you get fed up, and I say, I don't want to run anymore. So I'd sit on the ground, and he'd have to pick me up and put me on his shoulder and run the rest of the 20 miles with me on his back. And later on, when I used to tell this story, Mad Dog used to say, he was a hell of a storyteller. He'd say, he'd laugh when I tell that story, and he'd tell the people, when they say, he's not heavy, he's my brother, And that would make everybody laugh and all that. But now I forgot what the hell we were talking about.
That's all right, Butcher. That's a cool story. No, you can see so many stories like that in the books, too. But how did you come up with the name The Butcher?
Okay. So, after a while, my dog was wrestling in Hawaii. And he called me up. And he says, look, I've got a contract to go to Australia for 6 months, but he says, I needed the vacation so much. I'm enjoying myself so much here in Hawaii. He says, you're going to have to take my place and go to Australia. So I'm not going to tell you what happened. But I never saw him again. I took his place to go to Australia, and I never saw him for another 10 years. Because from Australia, I went to India. 2 years in Australia, 2 years in India, and 2 years in England. And when I came back, Mad Dog says, look, since you've been gone, he says, when they changed my name to the Mad Dog, he says, I've been making nothing but money. And he says, now that you're back, he says, you're going to wrestle with me. We're going to be tag team champions, and we're going to make nothing but money. But he says, I want to find you an animal name. He says, because me, Mad Dog, he says. So I'm thinking, well, maybe he'd call me Paul the Bull, or, my brother the Elephant, or something like that. And he didn't like any of them. He said, I got it. It's an animal name. We're dirty wrestlers. We're going to call you Paul the Pig. I said, did you get that?
Yes.
I said,
Paul the Pig, not Paul the Pig.
I'm not going under Paul the Pig. And then he started laughing, and he laughed. He couldn't stop. And I started laughing. And we said, he said, okay, well, we'll call you the Butcher. So I really got the name the Butcher from the Mad Dog.
That's so good. So it went from the bull, right? It went from the bull to the pig. No, we're going to call you the Butcher. The Butcher's the best. That's the best name right there.
Well,
it's so good.
I thought so too.
Yeah, you could cut. You're cutting. You're slicing. Did you have, the Butcher? Do you have any arms or limbs as part of the memorabilia that you saved over the years that you butchered up some of these opponents? You butchered them all around the world.
Yeah, but they're in storage right now.
That's awesome.
They're on ice right now.
Hey, you were a vicious heel, and you did the signature stomp. The stomp. The Butcher jumping up in the air doing the stomp. It was no one was doing that. It was so cool. Was that just something that happened in a match one time, or did you just think it beforehand and I'm going to just stomp around? Do you remember how that came about?
Actually, Mad Dog used to jump and come into the ring and jump around. So I started doing it, but really I started doing that when I wrestled in India. One of the best finishing holds before the hangman is, I'd get the guy on his back and jump. By that time I weighed 300 pounds, and I'd jump up in the air and come down with a 2-foot stomp on his stomach, and then nobody could survive that,
Okay, so Paul the Butcher. So who did the stomp first then, Mad Dog or the Butcher?
Mad Dog did everything first.
Ah, okay. And hey,
no doubt about it. I'm not about that.
And what a great something that you both did together was win tag team titles. The AWA, Vern Gagne's group, American Wrestling Association, you and the Mad Dog, the Butcher and the Mad Dog, Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling. How about that? Also, Mid-South Sports, you won championship there. It's just amazing. And in Canada, there's so many tag team titles that you both won. And what a great time. Tell us about teaming with Mad Dog and what it was like to have you brothers out there competing and winning and doing well.
Well, my brother from the beginning, when I was a kid, he was my protector, and I thought of him as that, But in the wrestling business, there was something different because he had his own style. And nobody could change the style style came from him being the shortest guy in the wrestling business. You understand what I mean? And you couldn't change him, and nobody wanted to, and it just got worse and worse. And as he got older, his voice, well, actually, he had a voice like that when he was young anyway. But he shouted, and he had to be the first one on the totem pole because he was the shortest of the family. And that was in his response, in his personality. And that's what he was. He was a villain at heart, you know. The reason he first started wrestling pro is that he was only 14 years old when my father, who was a policeman at the time, got fed up with people coming home and saying, your kid beat up my kid, and he should know better, son of a policeman, and blah, blah, blah. And my father got fed up of beating him up and telling him not to do that. And finally, one day, he said, if you're going to learn how to fight, he said, you're going to learn how to do it properly. And my father was a big boxing fan. So he took him to the YMCA, Central YMCA in Montreal. And just as he came in, this is the stroke of luck that we hit. He had a friend of his that was in his 60s, and he was the retired chief of police of the Montreal seaport. And his name was Bill Cowley. And he said, Fred, hey, what are you doing here? He said, at the YMCA. He said, well, I got my boy here, Maurice. He's 14, and he said, I'm fed up with getting him out of trouble. He's always beating up on people and everything. And I figure if he's going to be fighting all his life, he's going to make a living at it, so I'm going to teach him how to box. And Chief Colley, who was from England originally, a champion amateur wrestler of the British Empire, and a coach of the YMCA, he said, Fred, don't take him to the boxing room. He says even champions of boxing become punchy. He says, let us have him in the wrestling room. He says, we'll teach him how to wrestle, and then, you will never have any more trouble with him. So, listen to this, they took him to the wrestling room, and my father knew the wrestling coach already, and he told Frank Saxton, he said, this is my boy. He's always getting into trouble, and Mr. Colley says to bring him here and teach him how to wrestle. So Frank Saxton says, leave it to me. So he told Mad Dog, he told Maurice, who's 14. He says, so you know how to fight, right? Oh, yeah, Mad Dog, right away he jumps up and he says, well, look. He said, I want to know what you can do, he said. But you see that old man sitting over there? And Chief Colley was 62. And he said, I want you to push around, but don't hurt him. You understand? He says, because, he's an old man. I just want to see what you can do. So Mad Dog said to himself, well, God damn it, here's my turn, right? I'm really going to get to him. So and Mad Dog was telling me this story years after. He says, I figured I was going to jump into there. And he says, I was in there for 2 minutes. And he says, he turned me every way but loose until I had one leg over my hand other leg the other way, one arm under my other leg, and all I could see in front of me was a pair of testicles. And he says, I thought they were his. So I bit them, and they were mine. and he says, he never looked back. After that, 6 months later, he was part of the Canadian team. He went to the British 1948, the first Olympics after the Second World War. Mad Dog was 18 years old. And he only placed 7th. But, you know, wrestlers don't become Olympic wrestlers till they're 30 years old when they have the experience. 2 years later, he won the British Empire Games in Auckland, New Zealand. And he never looked back.
That's an awesome, that's an awesome story with that. And that led to all the Vachons getting into pro wrestling because Mad Dog was always getting into fights. And your dad bringing him to the YMCA and then not getting him in boxing, but getting him in wrestling. And when you're telling that story, I'm listening, and it's such a good story. I'm wondering, the old man that he had to wrestle inside the YMCA, could he have been the father of Stu Hart?
Well, that's a good one.
Good, I'm glad.
I got a story about Stu Hart.
Oh, wait, I want to hear it, Butcher, but I want to say this too. The Facebook page, so many good stories, so many good interactive. Paul the Butcher Vachon will be on his official Facebook page. It's facebook.com/Paul the Butcher Vachon. And there's just so much there. It's about Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame member. He is a multi-time tag team champion with his brother Mad Dog and others too. And official merchandise, event announcements, posts from the Butcher himself. His books are available there. Really great stories. The movie, you could check it out and get information about the movie, The Last Villain, which also has English subtitles. Very cool. Also at the Paul the Butcher Vachon, at Paul the Butcher Vachon, his Facebook page, facebook.com/Paul the Butcher Vachon. So you got to check those out. And by the way, the Butcher and Mad Dog were also Stampede Wrestling, 6-time tag team champions. Huge Stampede Wrestling in Canada. Okay, Butcher, Stu Hart, go for it.
All right, so Mad Dog says, I was working at a nightclub in Montreal. I was 18 years old. And I had just won a silver in the Canadian amateur champion in Regina. Anyway, that's beside the point. And Mad Dog says, you'll never make money wrestling amateur. So he said, I am working at a nightclub in Montreal. He says, I want us to go to Calgary because the promoter there, he's a fanatic about wrestling. He's got a whole bunch of boys. He's even got a gym in the basement. And we're going to go there. He's going to give us a $200 a week guarantee. Now, in those days, that was unheard of. You know, but the two French-Canadian brothers, anyway, we took a train on there. We rode on the train because in those days there was no Trans-Canada Highway. We rode on the train for 3 days, I think. Anyway, make a long story short, Stu's waiting for us at the station. And he said, we're going to go to the gym. I said, I know you guys want to get a workout and everything. And he said, I got a gym down in my basement. And, you know, he used to, all the new guys that used to come in, Stu would take him down there. and would come down with his wrestling trunks and stretch the hell out of him, you know. And we knew all that, you know. So anyway, to make a long story short, the first day we're there, we go down this visit. Stewie says, well, I know you guys want to go work out, so I'll let you go. But we know what he's going to do. So anyway, Mad Dog says, when Stu comes down, you and I will be wrestling. And he says, you ride me all over the place and don't let me up for nothing, you know. So for about 5-6 minutes, after we'd been working out, here comes Stu down with his trunks in his hand. And Mad Dog says, okay, now. So then I start riding him, and he tries to bridge, and I go all over the place. He didn't come down to wrestle Mad Dog. He came down to wrestle me because I was, 18 years old, right? But then he said, I think I hear Alan calling me, his wife, up there. So he said, I gotta go. I'm sorry, I wanted to work out, but I guess I won't have time. So he took off, and I never did wrestle Stu Hart.
That's great. That's great. Mad Dog was so smart. That's the thing. We see him. We see the wrestling fans, people that love wrestling. We know Mad Dog as the voice, and he's vicious and all. What a smart guy. He said, all right, ride me. Once Stu sees you having total control, he won't want to wrestle, and he was right.
He was absolutely right. And that way I didn't have to do it. I'm not sure if I could have done it, but what the hell, I was Canadian champion. In my heart, then I could beat anybody.
That's awesome. Did you ever, hey Butcher, did you ever want then, listen, of course, like you said, like Mad Dog said, there's no money in amateur wrestling. Still today, there's no money in amateur wrestling. But being that you were a Canadian champion and Mad Dog went to Europe and won championships in amateur wrestling, did you ever want to compete in the Olympics?
Well, yeah, I was going to. And the year after, Mad Dog was in 48. I wanted to, but when Mad Dog said that's enough amateur wrestling, you'll never make any money. So I said, okay. So then he was then in Texas, and I was just coming back from Regina, where I had the medal in amateur wrestling. And my bus went from Regina to Chicago to Detroit and then to Montreal to come back here, for God's sake. And it took 3-4 days, but anyway, that's another story. And he said, that's enough amateur wrestling. He said, you'll never make money. So this summer, I was 17 and a half, 18 years old when I started wrestling.
That's amazing, and that's also amazing. But you listen to Big Brother. Big Brother says, hey, this is what you need to do, and you were good. You listened to your big brother.
Well, yeah, but, at that age, I was afraid of him. That's a joke, by the way.
I hope so.